You're in the 06010.
Welcome to Fantasy Focus. Today's podcast is presented by Geico. You can watch us every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on ESPN's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube feeds, as well as the ESPN app. And you can download Fantasy Focus wherever you get your podcast. The whole crew is here. Field, Matthew, Stephania, and Daniel. And we're going to get right to it because we have some major news involving the best player in fantasy football, as earlier this morning, Adam Schefter broke some news regarding the status of Derrick Henry. I'm going to turn right to Stephania Bell for more. What can you tell us about this brutal news?
Well, it's just so unfortunate for Derrick Henry. If you were watching the game yesterday in the first quarter, he appeared to be having some trouble with his foot. He could be seen on the sideline getting attention from the medical staff, had his cleat off. This was his right foot. He did end up coming back into the game, but his numbers reflected that he was not running as well as he could have. And then Adam Schefter reporting that he has a foot injury that could potentially be season ending. Now, here's what I would say to all of that is that for fantasy purposes, obviously we're going to have to make some decisions, but until we find out the details of what the nature of the injury is and what the actual procedure is to address it, I wouldn't necessarily write him off for the season. We've seen this before. For fantasy purposes, I would make other plans, expecting that he'll miss the majority, if not all of the season. Yeah,
let's plan for the possibility of him missing a lot of time. We'll come back to Stephania for more. And again, we'll revisit this story throughout the show. It is, of course, the best player in fantasy. So, Matthew, this is sort of the brave unknown, right? Because for Derrick Henry's career, he has been as durable as any running back in the NFL. He's missed 2 games in his career, 2. Right. And one of those came as a rookie when he really wasn't even Derrick Henry. So we can sit here and tell you what the next man up looks like in Tennessee and what the offense looks like without Derrick Henry. We'd be lying because we haven't seen this offense in recent years since Ryan Tannehill got to Tennessee. Basically, Derrick Henry has been this machine who is better than every other player in the NFL at a lot of different things. Let's try to dive into the fallout. Let's begin with what it means for the rest of the backfield in Tennessee. Is there anybody that piques your interest right now?
Look, Field, I'm curious. You write our free agent finds column for ESPN. I'm sure it'll be out later today, as it always is. And my expectation is that Jeremy McNichols will be on that list. That Jeremy McNichols will be on that list, and he'll be popular in waivers, and he should be. But he's more of a pass-catching running back. And I tweeted this a little while ago after Adam broke the news, which is I don't believe the lead running back of the Titans, for our purposes, for fantasy football purposes, is currently on their roster as we sit here today. Okay. My expectation is that they will either sign a veteran, a free agent, or they will make a trade, assuming that Derrick Henry is going to miss significant time. Okay. I think McNichols is a nice back. He's had some success so far this year as a pass catcher especially, but this is an offense that's predicated on play action, on running a guy up the middle, having like a real strong between the tackles kind of runner. And while you can't go find another Derrick Henry, like that's one of the things that makes him King Henry, is that he's just a different kind of dude than like everyone else on the planet. The fact is that they're going to need additional help. And so I would pick up Jeremy McNichols, but expecting kind of 1-for-1 replacement, or even quote 80%, like, the way that we thought, well, Chuba Hubbard's going to be like 80% of Chris McCaffrey. I don't think that scenario exists at the moment in Tennessee.
Daniel?
I'm going to put you on the spot, and I hate to do this, but understanding if you,
don't
have
hate to do this.
Well, I do sort of hate to do this, because I don't want to put you in an unprepared spot. But in a situation where you have a fab, and it's not just I'm going to go out and put in a waiver claim, how much are you putting of your fab would you be putting in for someone like Jeremy McNichols? Knowing that you have lowered expectations, not at all going to be close to Derrick Henry, but like still worth rostering, how much of your fab would you throw towards him?
Can I hold? Because I think what you need to do is we all need to wait. Yes. Because it's Monday morning. And I have 11:04 on my watch. Waivers obviously run Tuesday night. The NFL trade deadline is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. There will be an ESPN special. I'll be a part of it tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So make sure you tune into that. If the Titans make some sort of move for a veteran through a trade, then all of a sudden the value of Jeremy McNichols is completely altered based off where we think it might be at right now.
Fair point.
Correct.
When you say a veteran, do you mean a veteran who's currently on a practice squad somewhere else, or a veteran who's unsigned?
I think I think all options are on the table for Tennessee.
Yeah,
what you have is here. I mean, again, listen, this is more your area, right? I mean, I'm sure you've been texting with agents and front office contacts throughout the morning, and I'm sure you will continue to do so, just like Schefter and all of our insiders have been. So this is much more your area than mine. But what I would say is, like, I think my guess is that if I'm the Tennessee front office, all options are on the table. You're calling all the teams like, hey, is this guy available? Who do you have? What are you looking for? Who's out there on practice squads?
Right.
Who's unsigned? Do we get Todd Gurley in here to kick the tires on him? Like,
right.
So there's guys like that. There's guys on practice squads. Tyson Williams hasn't been active for the Ravens for the last couple of games.
Yeah.
Right? So
it's a weird dynamic because the trade deadline, as I mentioned, is tomorrow. And if you're a team like some of the names that have been bandied about, so to speak, Tyson Williams for the Baltimore Ravens. Do the Ravens want to make the number one team in their conference right now, based on record, the Titans, potentially better by trading them Tyson Williams? Same, people are wondering, hey, with the Colts, like, you can't trade Marlon Mack in the division to a team that you are this close to competing with, even though you've lost to them twice. Like, can you imagine what Frank Reich would do to himself and Chris Ballard do to himself if the Titans come back down to earth a little bit without Derrick Henry, but maybe in December they win a couple of games and Marlon Mack runs for 90 yards in each of those games? Like, you just can't do it for a fifth-round pick. So
I can't do it for a fifth-round pick. That's a different debate. That's an NFL Live debate. But I'll just say this. If you're the Colts, you're 3-5, and Marlon Mack's not part of your future. And if you can get a third for him,
you're not getting a third for a guy who's a fourth-string running back on a last.
If you're the Titans
contract.
And you're desperate, you might. Anyway,
you've already traded away picks for Julio Jones. You can't do something like that. Anyways, we are sort of off the target here. What I would say is that yes, we need to have that conversation that Daniel just mentioned again around 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. What we'll do is we'll update it once more tomorrow morning if we have any further news, either on the extent of Derrick Henry's injury or they signed someone off of a practice squad today. We get word of their attempts to try to acquire somebody. For right now, based off what we know, I've got Jeremy McNichols as the only Titans running back on the waiver wire column.
Right.
I think that the pass catching actually does help him replicate Derrick Henry more because you're simply not going to find a runner like Derrick Henry. But he's got 21 catches in 8 games this season. Like, if he has 4 catches per game filling in for Derrick Henry, you might be able to establish a floor in the neighborhood of like 10 or 12 fantasy points for McNichols. And it is a good offensive line. It's a good offense. There could be some opportunities here. I think he would be like a sort of desperation RB2 if he takes over as the next man up. And until further notice, like we have to operate with, like,
we have to operate
guy in mind.
On exactly what we know. And there's Ronald Jones has been talked about, like Melvin Gordon. Like, I would love, like, fantasy-wise, I would love Melvin Gordon. Broncos won yesterday against Washington, but I don't know if it's necessarily their year.
Yeah,
freeing up Javonte Williams. They also have Mike Boone there.
That one makes sense.
And Melvin Gordon's a free agent after this year. That one makes a lot of sense. But Schefter did say that was unlikely in his tweet. We will see. I think what I will say is this. I don't think you replace Derrick Henry with one guy.
Totally.
I mean, the point is that he was built so differently, built so differently that you can't, like, it's going to have to be somewhat of a committee. I do agree with you that McNichols' pass catching ability elevates his fantasy floor. But I don't know, Daniel, to answer your question, am I breaking the bank for Jeremy McNichols? I don't know that I necessarily am. And if you have Derrick Henry, I think it depends on where you are in the season and what your situation is. But like, you've got a massive, massive hole now that I don't necessarily know that one player. He was not only the number one running back in fantasy, he was the number one running back in fantasy by 40 points.
I think the fab question's a little bit, it's too complicated to answer with a good, like a good,
concise
solid,
answer.
Actual piece of logical information here.
But the last thing, I'll just wrap this up. What this means to me is obviously, look, their offense is predicated on play action, and that is a big part of what Tannehill does. I would say, and by the way, here's our upcoming schedule. They play the Rams on Sunday, then home to New Orleans. Yeah. Then they've got Houston, okay. At New England, defense that's improving, and a bye. Other than the Texans 3 weeks from now, there's not a matchup there that you feel good about. I would say, until further notice, A.J. Brown is the only Titans player that you can feel confident about starting every single week in fantasy. Doesn't mean that you won't be desperate and you need to stream Tannehill. Maybe Julio gets active and you're thinking about him. But the only must start on Tennessee is A.J. Brown.
By the way, just along those lines, and again, this is why I want to really have this conversation again tomorrow. There's already been a report that Tennessee will kick the tires on Adrian Peterson this week, right? So, let's revisit this tomorrow to see if they've signed anybody or if there are intentions to sign a player like Peterson or somebody else like Todd Gurley you mentioned, and then we'll have a better feel for what Jeremy McNichols' value actually is.
One quick thing that I just want to add, and then we'll move on here.
Okay.
Monitor Twitter, monitor Field and Shefty and all of our news breakers, because here's the thing. There's actually an opportunity here to actually maybe make a sneaky move because the Monday night game hasn't played yet. So if you have it, right, you could, right. So like Adrian Peterson, like, right. So like
you have,
Darius
Slayton on your bench.
If you've got or even, by the way, if I've already lost and I'm playing Graham Gano, exactly. Yep. I'll drop Graham Gano. I will grab, take a flyer on somebody. Idea. Right. Yeah. So my point is,
you got a good one.
Right. Or even, yeah, there you go. Thanks very much. Blind squirrel, nuts, the whole thing. So what I would say though is all seriousness, like, right, by the way, or like Latavius Murray, like if you have a player on a bye that you've been sitting on, you know what I mean? Like Brian Edwards, who's just sitting at the end of your bench and you're like, you know what, if I lose Brian Edwards, I'm okay with it. Like my point is that there may be players on your roster that aren't locked yet, either because they haven't played yet tonight or because they're on a bye, and that can allow you to go get somebody that hasn't played yet, whether it's a free agent like an Adrian Peterson or even somebody that like a Tyson Williams, who's been rumored as well, right? So,
yeah, good idea. Let's hold tight on any other Derrick Henry analysis for right now. We'll revisit perhaps later on in the show and definitely tomorrow. There are going to be developments in this story, both related to Henry's timeline and also how the Titans might move on without Derrick Henry. But for now, we're going to table it. And we're going to move to a conversation that is significant. It's, I think, an important one. There's not a lot of easy ways to talk about it and talk about fantasy football at the same time. But yesterday, during the early inactives, we learned that Falcons wide receiver Calvin Ridley would be out for the game due to personal reasons. Ridley followed up with a statement later on in the afternoon, and it reads as follows. These past few weeks have been very challenging, and as much as I'd like to be on the field competing with my teammates, I need to step away from football at this time and focus on my mental well-being. This will help me be the best version of myself now and in the future. I want to thank my teammates, the entire Atlanta Falcons organization, our great friends, my great fans, my friends, and my family for all of this support during this time. This is the second game that Calvin Ridley has missed due to personal reasons. He did not travel with the team when they played in London. This is a lot bigger than football. I would just say that we all are very much in agreement in that. We wish Calvin Ridley the very best during what I can only imagine is extremely challenging for him. He may not realize this right now, or maybe he does, but I think perhaps some of us we all should be feeling both sympathetic and empathetic and also grateful, because Calvin Ridley's strength to open up about what he's dealing with is going to empower other people who are dealing with something similar to feel it is okay to be vulnerable and be public in their vulnerability. So we should really be lauding Calvin Ridley while also hoping for the best for him. It's a really difficult situation, Matthew. We hope he's back soon, but more importantly, we just hope he gets right.
1,000%. You said that perfectly, Field. I couldn't say it better. I mean, I want to applaud Calvin Ridley because I'm with you, because it is a very real subject. It's a very real thing that many people deal with, and somebody with Calvin Ridley's platform and fame being public about this and discussing it helps lessen the stigma around it. Mm-hmm. And also, I agree that give people that might not have the platform or the strength of somebody like Calvin Ridley to say, like, hey, you know what? I'm going to raise my hand too. Hey, I also need help. I also need some time for myself. I also am dealing with some issues. And so, this is something that I've written about a little bit as well in terms of my experience growing up. And so, much love, respect, and applause to Calvin Ridley. I agree with you, Field. All of us here at the 06010 wish him the very, very best, him and his family, his loved ones. It feels silly and insignificant to talk about the fantasy football implications of this, but that is the gig. So we do not want to make light of the situation. We believe we believe Calvin's doing the right thing for him and his family, and we wish him tons of success. And we hope he hurries back, but not too soon, when he's ready.
Yeah,
whenever he's ready.
So there's no way to pivot other than to hard pivot. So let's just talk about the Falcons pass catchers for a minute here, Matthew. Sure. And frankly, I'm not sure anything changes in terms of the other pieces in place here. Kyle Pitts had a quiet day yesterday, 2 catches for just 13 yards, but good luck finding 5 more valuable tight ends than him this season. The 2 running backs were busy as usual, especially Cordarrelle Patterson, who found the end zone once again. But as we've seen this year with the Titans' other wide receivers, they've got a lot of guys who can, on occasion, do some nice things. Russell Gage had a couple of good games recently. Yesterday, he didn't see a target.
Yeah.
Tajay Sharp.
Yeah, he ran 20 routes.
Yep.
Didn't get a target.
Tajay Sharp had 20 routes yesterday, and he had 6 targets. So, I don't want to be terse, but I think probably for now, you're not starting a Falcons wide receiver until you see, unless you're in a league that has Cordarrelle Patterson as wide receiver eligible,
Correct.
You are not starting a Falcons wide receiver until Calvin Ridley returns to the football field. But
that is correct. It's Patterson and Pitts. You know what I mean? And honestly, the rest are complementary players. And in terms of fantasy, like unless you're in the deepest of leagues and you're sort of desperate, feels like there are other wide receivers on better offenses that maybe have a more consistent role in a particular week that you could look for. They don't feel like a great streaming option. Again, to your point, like they just sort of like, you sit here and you say like, oh, I think it's going to be Gage. And then you're like, nope. And then you're like, oh, maybe it's going to be Zacharias, and I just pronounced the name. But like, like it
one
feels.
Week it'll be Gage, 1 week it'll be Zacchaeus, 1 week it'll be Sharp. It's going to just keep rotating like a carousel. Stephania, I want to get to your thoughts on this situation with Calvin Ridley before we move on to Dak Prescott.
Yeah, thank you. And I think because we tend to think of injuries as being only physical in nature, and we sort of address physical health, and mental health has not been, until recently, really included in the scope of overall total player and athlete health. And what you're seeing in the sports medicine community now is a much bigger attention focus to mental health as a part of overall health and well-being. And I do want to point out that 2 years ago, the NFL got behind this by establishing an initiative whereby there would be a committee called the Mental Health and Wellness Committee that would oversee educational programs on mental health for players, that a behavioral health clinician is now required to be present in every NFL club for at least 8 to 12 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is just all part of encouraging players and staff as well, everyone, to really participate in promoting wellness in the area of mental health, which is equally important to that of physical health.
Well said. Couldn't have put it any better myself. All the best to you, Calvin Ridley. Let's take a quick break before we come back and talk about Dak Prescott and a handful of other injuries that we are monitoring from yesterday.
Just before we go to break, just to put one final wrap sort of on the Calvin Ridley conversation again, and this is merely from a fantasy football perspective, and I don't mean to, but it is what it is. All I was going to say is that one thing that Adam Schefter did say yesterday on Fantasy Football Now, when the news of him missing this game came up, is that Adam said this is expected to be a longer absence than last time. Remember, he missed the game in London. It was the 1 week game, and then he came back the next week. My expectation here is, again, we have no timetable, but I would, if I was a fantasy manager with Calvin Ridley on my roster, I would be prepared to be without him for an extended period of time. And so as you hit waivers this week, and as you look to sort of roster, what you're doing with your team, understand that that may be a hole that you're going to need to fill here for a while. It's not going to just be a 1 week thing.
We'll talk about Dak Prescott in just a second, but before we do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. But you know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowner's or renter's insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Captain Morgan. NFL fans know that as the season gets underway, you got to have the right players for all 60 minutes to bring that spark. Sometimes you got to sub someone in to switch things up. Same thing goes for that drink in your hand on game day. So if you're looking to sub in something more refreshing, pour yourself a delicious, crisp Captain Morgan Original Spiced Rum and Ginger. Sub in the Captain Morgan, the official spiced rum of the NFL. Visit CaptainMorgan.com to find Captain near you. Drink responsibly. Captain Morgan Rum Company, New York, New York. And really quickly, before we come back from break, sorry about that, Lisa. We have one more announcement. I want you guys to join me, Matthew Berry, and Stephania Bell for a live virtual mailbag podcast where we're going to answer your questions that you submit tomorrow, Tuesday, November 2nd at 6 p.m. Eastern. We'll hop on a Zoom for a virtual live show presented by our friends over at Geico and Body Armor. Registration is required and space is limited, but the event is totally free, and we'll spend the entire time answering the questions that you submit when you register. So if you have Derrick Henry on your roster, or if you have Calvin Ridley on your roster, or you want to ask questions about all these things, now is the time to jump in. We will answer your questions directly. Register at bit.ly/focus112. That's all lowercase, bit.ly/focus, and the number is 112. We hope you'll join us tomorrow, Tuesday, November 2nd at 6 p.m. for a virtual live mailbag show with me, Stephania Bell, and Matthew Berry, presented by Geico and Body Armor. All right, back to you, Field.
Thank you, Daniel. And let's talk about Dak Prescott. And this was one that became the story of the day yesterday because we learned early that the optimism that was once there surrounding Dak Prescott playing had waned. He eventually did not play, and Stephania Bell, it was a game-time decision, but was this really a game-time decision for Dak Prescott?
Well, we were all talking, Field, yesterday on the show about how we didn't expect him to play. I think that for all intents and purposes, the tea leaves were pointing to Dak sitting this one out in the interest of just being extra cautious, knowing we're just reaching the halfway point of the season. This is a guy who came off an ankle fracture dislocation surgery and has been nothing short of phenomenal, but then strains his calf on the same leg. And while he could have probably played and who knows, might not have had a setback, nobody would want to be sitting here today saying, we wish we'd waited another week. Now,
right.
If you were watching the pregame workouts, it looked very extensive. And hey, Dak still needed to get a workout in. So whether that workout really led to changing any of the factors that went into sitting him on Sunday night, who knows? But it was great that he got the workout in. And I still think the best thing we saw from Dak last night was the hug he gave Cooper Rush in the tunnel after that amazing game. The good news is Dak should be ready to go by the time the Cowboys play next week.
They play at home against Denver before hosting the Falcons. And probably the best part it was a great moment, but the best part for the Cowboys, they win this game. They are 6-1, riding high, looking like one of the best teams in the NFL, Matthew. And
this is why I didn't rank Dak Prescott. We talked about this on the show, and I'm just like, and you're like, you didn't rank Dak Prescott. I'm like, because Dak Prescott ain't playing. And
the good news was the offense actually didn't change that much. Now, to be clear, if Dak Prescott if he had suffered an injury that was going to cost him 4 to 6 weeks, it would have changed my outlook on CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. But for one night, you can scrape by, and kudos to Cooper Rush, who ended up playing pretty well last night after a little bit of a sketchy start. I thought that Kellen Moore, their offensive coordinator, was awesome last night.
Yeah.
And this is Amari Cooper for you, by the way, right? You start to fade Amari Cooper a little bit because of 5 straight games outside the top 25. And what does he do? He finishes with 26.2 fantasy points, including an unbelievable catch late in the game, 8 for 122 and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb had 6 catches for 112 yards. Cedric Wilson had a long touchdown catch. And then an amazing play. How about that from Cedric Wilson? That was so
running
cool.
Throw.
So
I don't
cool.
know. I don't think every quarterback in the NFL can make that throw.
I was saying this recently. I was trying to think. I feel like there are 2 throws that stand out from wide receivers recently.
Okay.
Jarvis Landry threw an absolute bomb a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Mm-hmm. And this one from Cedric Wilson is up there. I know that Mohamed Sanu back in the day used to toss the pill around pretty good too.
Yep.
But that last night was really, to have the instincts to elude pressure and then make a throw on the run. Very impressive from Cedric Wilson. But Matthew, I think the good news was if you wrote it out with your Cowboys, you're probably no worse for the wear last night, and we do expect Dak back next week. Stephania, I want to ask you.
And by the way, Cedric Wilson's a nice player.
He's a good player.
I have him in our dynasty league, and if anything were to ever happen, he's gotten some run with Michael Gallup's injury, but if anything were to ever happen to Cooper or Lamb, Cedric Wilson would be really, really good. He's the reason he can't go on the field is not because of talent. Cedric Wilson can play.
Sure can.
And so, very impressive, obviously, on the long touchdown yesterday. But just, that was really nice. And Cooper was surprising. But this is what I think we talked about this, And listen, I tweeted about it like, hey, I was just like, I'm definitely starting Zeke, Schultz, and CeeDee Lamb once, we knew Dak wasn't playing. I said that yesterday on the show as well. I said Cooper's more of a toss-up, right? Because he had been very inconsistent. But one of the things I think we talked about last week about Amari Cooper, and there's a couple of wide receivers like this. I would argue all the Arizona wide receivers are like this, basically. Either you just sort of got to start them, and this is what it is. We talked about this, that Amari Cooper is up and down, and at the end of the year, he's going to be a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. But you just have picking those games of when he's going to go off versus the games where you wish you'd sat him. It's fool's gold. Like you have to put him in your lineup. You have to close your eyes, and it is what it is.
That's what we said all week. Was just like, I know I'm a little bit lower, but you're probably still playing him, whether you have him and you've been frustrated or not. A couple of pieces of Panthers news. Let's start with Christian McCaffrey, Stephania, because he is eligible to play in Week 9. Do you have any sense right now about whether he will return to the field this week?
It sounds like the Panthers are hopeful that he is going to be practicing and returning to play in Week 9. Here's what I would say about that. And we've talked about this before. The issue with McCaffrey and his return from a hamstring injury that has cost him this much time already is that you don't want to overload him in his first game back. And I'll be really interested to see what happens, how they balance this out. He's so important to their offense, but if you look at the number of snaps he plays, the percentage of time he's on the field, he is on the field more than any other running back in terms of relative to the offense's total plays. And then he touches the ball more than most any other running back within those snaps that he's on the field. We know that that means an increase in injury risk. So when you have somebody coming off a hamstring injury, which already has about a 10% rate of re-injury for a running back, and he's missed this much time, do you immediately put him back into the workload? That's going to be the question the Panthers are going to have to answer. And I think they're going to have to balance it to make sure that they don't undo what's happened in the last few weeks.
Yeah, we'll monitor whether he does return to practice this week. Obviously, if a player returns to practice, it does not mean he is guaranteed to play. We saw it with Jerry Jeudy, who got a couple weeks of practice as an example, but we'd love to see CMC back on the field. If he does play Stephania, it is no certainty that his quarterback will be Sam Darnold.
Yeah, Sam Darnold took a big hit yesterday. Expect that, concussion protocol, right? You never know exactly what the timetable is going to be. So we will wait and watch day by day.
P.J. Walker, the next man up, of course, in that quarterback room. Let's go to the Saints, Stephania, because they got an incredible win yesterday. What a gutty performance that was from just a tough, resilient group. But it was not without some devastating blows, specifically Jameis Winston, who sounds like he may not play again this year.
Yeah, Jameis Winston went down. If you saw the play, it was a horse collar tackle by linebacker Devin White for the Buccaneers, his former teammate. And I'm sure he felt bad about it after, but this is where I get on my soapbox and I say I think the penalty should be stronger for a horse collar tackle. I think they should be ejected from the game. This puts the player at risk for season-ending injuries in so many possible ways. It can affect their neck, their head. And in Jameis's case, we saw his knee. He got it twisted underneath him. His knee was going inward, what we call a valgus stress, and a twist rotation. His spine is getting bent to the left side. It could have torn his ankle up as well, but if you watch the video, his cleat did come clear of the turf. So hopefully the ankle is okay. Focus is on his knee. Sean Payton said afterward he didn't know the details of the injury, but Jameis was on crutches, and he understood it to be a significant knee injury. We should have more information later today.
I don't know if I even want to ask you about Michael Thomas because I'm assuming you don't have an update, or could I be wrong?
Well, I think we're just sort of in that limbo mode. There's clearly something going on because he has not returned when we thought he initially would return. And the Saints have not provided an update yet, but the questions are going to keep coming back to the Saints about what the expectations are for Michael Thomas. And I imagine that we're going to get some sort of update soon.
I don't know. For those that aren't listening, not watching, shrugging my shoulders. We have no idea. But let's talk about the rest of the pass catchers, Matthew, without Jameis Winston. As of right now, like right this second, the only healthy quarterback on the Saints roster, only two healthy quarterbacks are Trevor Siemian, Ian Book, their fourth-round pick out of Notre Dame. It sounds like Taysom Hill could be back this week. He's been in concussion protocol over the past couple of weeks. Let's actually start there because I actually have Taysom Hill on the waiver wire column this week.
I would agree.
Because if he's cleared to play on Sunday, he might be a top 12 fantasy option. Think about the 4 games last year.
I was just going to say, he should be the number one quarterback. We're doing the fantasy show with Matthew Berry later today, and we're doing our waivers. And right now we have Taysom Hill as our number 2 quarterback. But if we find out that, if we were going to move him up to number 1, if we got more definitive news on Winston and or Taysom Hill.
So let's make the case for Taysom Hill, by the way. Last year, you look back, he started 4 games.
Right.
In those 4 games, he threw for at least 230 yards on 3 occasions. The only one in which he didn't was the game against the Broncos where they had to start Kendall Hinton. That game was completely out of whack in so many ways. Beyond that, over those 4 games, he had 209 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. So Taysom Hill's floor, or on average, he gave you 11 points just with his legs right away. And while they do have Alvin Kamara and they now have Mark Ingram, they were not afraid to use him as their goal line runner at the end of in the middle of last season.
He is going to be, and I understand yesterday was an anomaly, but what he would be is a
Jalen Hurts.
Poor man's Jalen Hurts is about what I was going to say, which is that one of the reasons why Jalen Hurts has been a top 5 fantasy quarterback and has scored 20 or more fantasy points in every game this year up until yesterday, when of course I put him on the love list. Thanks, Jalen. But whatever. He's made me look very smart for much of this year and in the preseason. I had him much higher than everyone else going into the year. But the point is that because the rushing ability that it has with his legs, and there's a lot of quarterbacks that get you points with the legs, but not all of them also get you points with their arm. And the ones the guys that get you points with their legs and their arms are usually the guys that are at the very top, like Josh Allen and Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson and the elite of the elite. And so Jalen Hurts is in that conversation. And so Taysom Hill, does he run as much as those guys? No, but he still runs a lot. And is he as good a passer as those guys? No, he's not, but he still passes a lot. It's still a really good offense. So I would agree with you. I mean, Taysom Hill was a top 12 fantasy quarterback over those 4 weeks, and I believe he was top 9 in 3 of those 4 weeks, or the Kendall Hinton game. Again, sort of skews that. Thirsty Kyle can pop in here with the exact numbers, but yeah, I mean, to me, I don't know who you have at quarterback number 1, but to me, it's either Justin Fields or Taysom Hill as your number 1 quarterback. And if I knew prior to waivers that Winston was going to miss significant time, which it looks like right now. We're hoping for the best, but right?
It's more about whether Taysom Hill clears concussion protocol.
And that's the other thing.
Yeah.
If I knew Taysom Hill was starting on Sunday, he's the number 1 waiver pick at quarterback. And
I think he's ahead of Justin Fields even if he doesn't. Because, who do you trust for the rest of the season, Justin Fields or Taysom Hill more? Who do you trust more?
Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill has as many games remaining as Justin Fields does.
Sure.
Excuse me. Even if he misses on Sunday, they have 1 more game because they've had their bye. Chicago hasn't. So you're still getting the same number of potential games, even if Hill misses on Sunday.
Right. My only argument for a Fields over a Hill at the moment, what we're doing on the show, is it's if you need a guy for Sunday and you don't know yet, we know Justin Fields is playing on Sunday. As of this taping, or this broadcast, we don't yet know that Taysom Hill is going to be cleared, but we have high hopes, and 1,000% he should be a priority on waivers. Even if by the way, again, waivers isn't always about filling your team needs. A lot of times it's about adding depth to your team because you're like, well, no one's going to trade for Taysom Hill. Okay, fine. But if Taysom Hill is a viable quarterback and can start for you, and let's say you have Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers, now that's somebody you could trade, and now you could fill your Derrick Henry hole or your Calvin Ridley hole. You understand what I'm saying? Like again, give yourself some options because you may not be able to find a Derrick Henry replacement or a Calvin Ridley replacement on waivers, but you can find your quarterback replacement on waivers, and then maybe somebody in your league is willing to give you a good running back or wide receiver for an Aaron Rodgers, a Lamar Jackson, somebody like that, right?
Last thought here I agree. Last thought on the Saints is that I know how bad the numbers were last year for Alvin Kamara as a receiver during the first 3 starts of Taysom Hill's tenure.
Yes.
This is probably I'm putting trust in Sean Payton because I trust Sean Payton. I can't imagine that Alvin Kamara is as uninvolved in the passing game as he was last year if Taysom Hill is again the starter. They're so short on weapons, and the Saints are smart enough to know that the one thing they do better than perhaps any other team in the NFL is get the running back involved in the passing game. I don't believe that the value of Kamara will crater as much as it did last year if Taysom Hill is indeed the starting quarterback starting in Week 9. Stephania, the Jaguars have one really, really good player on offense. That's James Robinson. he left the game early yesterday.
Yeah, it was scary. It sounded like it could be a really significant injury, but Adam Schefter tweeting just this morning that he has escaped what they thought was a significant injury, and the Jaguars are now calling him day to day.
Okay, and it sounds like Urban Meyer said yesterday after the game it was a bruised heel, which I don't know what that means, but Schefter did not rule. I know you're sort of sitting there like, yeah, we'll talk about that one on Wednesday, see if it's actually a bruised heel. Schefter said his status for Week 9 is officially in question. So it's questionable for Week 9. If he plays, obviously great news, but Carlos Hyde will make the waiver wire column. We had some sort of fun at the not fun at the expense of, but we were so desperate for the Jaguars to turn the keys over to James Robinson from the jump this year because Carlos Hyde is really not that special of a back. I mean, it ended up being right because James Robinson got the keys and he was great. Carlos Hyde, though, based off of volume, he can catch. He's not like a complete zero in the passing game. He's not an explosive runner, but he's a rugged runner. All of those things would lead Carlos Hyde to be a very usable RB2 if James Robinson is out for Week 9. And the thing about the Jaguars is, like, you're never worried about the matchup, right? Because no matter who they're playing, they're going to be big underdogs. They happen to be playing the Bills, who they are 14-point underdogs to at home, but that's kind of how things roll for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Stephania, 2 more injury updates. Guys who were question marks going into yesterday and then left their games yesterday. One of them with a new injury on T.Y. Hilton.
Right, T.Y. Hilton, who actually looked pretty good until he went out with what looked like it could be a neck injury and a head injury. It's being called a concussion. He's already been ruled out for Thursday night's game, per Mike Wells reporting that this morning. Okay,
so we'll talk more about Michael Pittman and some of the other complimentary pass catchers, especially during Thursday's preview show. And then Gronk, Stephania, who maybe the Bucs are regretting bringing him back yesterday.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when Jeff Darlington spoke with us on the show, he was talking about how he could maybe even have come back a week sooner based on how good he was feeling. And Bruce Arians, after the game, sounded like he regretted allowing Gronkowski to play, but said Gronkowski had been nudging him. Of course, he was coming off multiple rib fractures and a lung injury, but he left with back spasms. Now, it's not possible to say from a distance whether they were related, whether it was just a fact of deconditioning, which happens for sure when you're compromised with ribs and lung injuries, or if it was something specifically in his back related to the area around the ribs, but didn't seem to matter. It was back spasms that took him out, and we'll see when we get Rob Gronkowski back in the mix.
The Bucs have a lot of tight ends, O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. They also go on their bye this week, so we'll have plenty of time to discuss how you could fill in for Gronk if you're going to turn to another Bucs tight end. Why don't we do this? Knock out our last couple of live reads, and then we'll just rip through as much content as we can for the last 20 or so minutes of the show. And let me remind you that support for this podcast and the following message comes from Supercuts. Hair, it has a way of growing back faster than we want it to.
Nope.
Somehow it can feel like we need more haircuts than we have time for.
Agreed.
I wish.
Luckily, Supercuts is here to make grabbing a haircut easy. This is a live read for me, Matthew.
I understand.
Supercuts is here for you if you're someone who needs a haircut, but doesn't think they have time for a haircut. No more scouring the web for salons with availability. You can use the Supercuts app to find the location nearest to you and check in or just walk in. Another bonus, the salon shows estimated wait time so you know exactly what you're in for. As for the cut itself, it's always super solid, thanks to Supercuts' highly trained stylists. Get in, get out, and get to that thing you needed a haircut for. Whether you've got a first date or a vacation coming up or just want to look good, Supercuts makes getting a haircut effortless. It's not just any haircut, it's Supercuts. Check in now on the Supercuts app or on supercuts.com.
If you're not a Lions fan, it's been a great start to the NFL season, and it only gets better at DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. DraftKings is putting new customers in the center of the action with a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. So get in on the action now. It's simple. Just listen to CSS-DFS in the Fantasy Focus Football podcast feed, then pick your lineup, stay under the salary cap, and see how your team stacks up against the competition. Feel the NFL action like never before with a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. And this is the best part. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. You can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you want. So download the DraftKings app now and use the code FFF. This week, new customers can get a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. Enter code FFF to get a free shot at millions in total prizes with your first deposit. That's code FFF only at DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details.
21 minutes remain on the clock. We are going to just pound through this information. And the first segment is called, What the Heck? Like, what happened to these guys? We start in Buffalo, where they win yesterday. 26-11 was the final. But kind of a weird game for Buffalo. They didn't actually feel like they were totally dominant throughout this game, even though it was not close in the end. Emmanuel Sanders goes bagel, Matthew. 0 catches yesterday on 4 targets. I'm not chalking this up to much more than just like a random no-show and the fact that there were a couple of deep shots they just didn't connect on yesterday.
That's exactly right. I mean, there were a couple of times where Sanders was open and just Allen missed the throw. And had he connected on one of those, I think the narrative around him is different. Miami played good defense. To your point, like I know it doesn't look it from the box score, but this was a like kind of an ugly slugfest for a lot of the game where neither team was really doing much. And you know, listen, the corners played well. I know they've been under fire, you know, this season, you know, Byron Jones and Xavier Howard, but I thought they played well in this particular game, and which is one of the reasons why Cole Beasley had such a huge game in this one. That's where Josh Allen found some success, is attacking sort of the middle of the field, kind of dinking and dunking his way. So I'm, as somebody who has a lot of Emmanuel Sanders this year, you know, he was a preseason guy for me, not worried about it. One of the just a bad day at the office, but I would be buying Emmanuel Sanders if somebody in your league isn't worried about this.
A nice call by Mike Clay on Cole Beasley based off the wide receiver cornerback matchup. Let's go to Los Angeles, where Mike Williams was held to just 2 catches and 19 yards against the Patriots. Matthew, he now has 4 awesome games, and then he has, 5 awesome games, and then 2 really bad games basically this season. I think what we're going to chalk this up to as well, Matthew, is that like I think over the 17 games, you'll probably have 12, maybe 13 weeks where you feel great about Mike Williams. He might win your matchup, Daniel, and then he'll have 4 or 5 where it's just sort of disappointing. So
this is sort of my question on Mike Williams, right? Because like you said, 4 games over 20 fantasy points. His 3 other games this year, 2.1, 4.7, 3.9. And the idea that in all you look at it, he's had less than 5 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Started out super hot, but he's kind of come back down to earth a little bit. And my question to you guys as a part of this is,
sell high?
I don't want to say sell high, but is this Mike Williams? Is this the offense just wasn't clicking for a couple of games? Do you think it, which Mike Williams is the real Mike Williams, or is it somewhere in between?
Here's where you win. Because where you win is that you didn't draft Mike Williams to be a starter.
Correct.
You drafted Mike Williams. He was wide receiver 48 in terms of preseason ADP. So whatever he gives you is basically gravy. That's what he is, Daniel. That's what he is. He is Tyler Lockett just on steroids.
Low Mike
in terms of like
Evans-y?
his size, right? Mike Evans is more consistent than.
Is he fantasy gravy? Is that what you're calling him?
Fantasy gravy?
Yeah, you just said whatever he gets you is gravy. So he's fantasy gravy.
Oh, I get it.
I'm just
Thanksgiving.
I like that phrase.
Yeah. But he's a oversized version of Tyler Lockett right now, right? With less, Tyler Lockett had 12 catches yesterday. But the point is that you're gonna play him every week. Some weeks he's going to literally win you your week, and then some weeks he's going to have 2.9 or 3.9 fantasy points. You got to just chalk it up, ride the wave, man.
Yeah, I think a little bit. Listen, you look a little closer at the schedule, right?
Okay.
So the 3 games in which he has struggled.
Okay.
New England this week, at Baltimore the week prior to the bye.
Okay.
And then week 4 against Las Vegas, which I feel that was the game he got hurt in. Right, so I wonder if he's 100% healthy. That I don't know about, but
he has. He's also had great weeks since he hurt that knee.
Yeah, no, the Cleveland game in week 5 was unbelievable, right? 8 for 165, 2 touchdowns. So I just think. But by the way, I think New England's a really good defense. I think the Ravens a pretty good defense. What?
Ravens have allowed over 400 passing yards in half their games this year.
Yeah, but I think they made a point of taking out Mike. I think what has happened is that Mike Williams has become a focal point for defenses, whereas probably early in the season Keenan Allen was. So I think there's a little bit of a switch. I guess what I would tell you is that on next week they're at Philadelphia, then they're home to Minnesota, then they're home to Pittsburgh. Two of those 3 are tough-ish defenses, but none of them really scare you. I would still start Mike Williams all 3 games.
Yeah, I mean, again, this comes down to, you said this earlier with Amari Cooper. And Amari's obviously, I think he's still a better player. I think he has,
right.
His peaks maybe even greater than Mike Williams' peaks. But I would say that the strategy is the same. Like, you are starting him, acknowledging that, like, there are certain like if Cooper Kupp gets you 2.9 fantasy points in a game, you kick yourself. You're like, what the heck, man? Like, I just got unlucky. When it happens to Mike Williams, you say, like, oh, like, I've known this guy for 4 years. Like, occasionally this does happen. Yeah. Let's move forward here.
But I guess moving forward,
yeah,
I am more buying Mike Williams than fading him.
Totally. Yeah, like I said, I think he'll have like 10, 11, 12, 13 games, or well, maybe not 13, but let's say 10 or 11 games this year where you're like, heck yeah. And then 5 where you're like, why did I do that?
Right.
Noah Fant yesterday was disappointing.
I don't say heck, though.
No.
I use a different word.
Right. You say hawk.
No. The word I use starts with F. The letter
What the
F.
frick?
Friend.
Exactly.
What
Friend.
the frick? Yeah.
Friend.
All right. Noah Fant yesterday for the Denver Broncos, just 2 catches on 4 targets, 8 yards. It feels like Denver spreading things around so much, just sort of going to limit players like him, right? He has under 50 receiving yards in 6 of his past 7 games. Basically, he needs a touchdown. He's a really talented guy, obviously, big-time athlete. He could be better in a better offense in a more concentrated role, Matthew, but he is what he is. He's like a borderline startable tight end who...
So let me get this straight. So you said he needed a touchdown to pay off?
He's like every other tight end?
So you mean he's a tight end?
Correct, yeah.
Whatever. So you mean he's a tight end not named Travis Kelce?
Correct.
Right.
That's it.
I mean, basically, he's not Darren Waller. He's not Travis Kelce.
Right.
He's a tight end. Right.
Basically. So let's move forward
Yes.
then. Enough of that. Antonio Gibson. I'm going to pardon myself from this conversation. Stephania, he came into the game. I think he had a full practice on Friday, supposedly trending in the right direction
health-wise. They took him off the injury report.
Yeah.
But I don't have a whole lot of confidence. We've talked about this, what's going on as far as how the players are being managed right now in Washington. The training room staff is at half staff. And Antonio Gibson, I believe, is still playing hurt and not performing very well. So, they have a bye this week, and I hope that serves him well.
Matthew, I have both he and J.D. McKissick on the War Room, in my War Room team.
Yeah. How's that going for you?
If Derrick Hill score 21.2 fantasy points tonight, I'll be happy. Make the case for me starting Antonio Gibson over J.D. McKissick going forward.
Do I have to?
No, that's the point.
No,
I mean, right.
Nope.
I mean, because listen, Jared Patterson got some nice run yesterday. Here's the other problem, right, is that I don't know that you can make that case just because for 2 reasons. Number one is obviously their defense is terrible. It's awful. They played okay yesterday. They played better than they
played
have.
much better yesterday.
Yeah,
Denver helps, but they played a lot better.
Right, exactly. I mean, facing Teddy, but in general, their offense has struggled. So they're down in games and they're having to throw. Here's the other problem: is their offense at one point in yesterday's game they were out 4 of their 5 offensive line starters. Mm-hmm. Like it was a middle of the pack offensive line at full health, and then when you get down to like all backups and street guys, like it becomes really tough, especially when you're facing, a solid defense in Denver. And so wondering if that's more effective, like a quick dump off to J.D. McKissick is a more effective way of moving the ball than running between the tackles when you've got a really beat up offensive line. So I think there's also some of that as well. So the Patterson usage was surprising. I didn't expect that. I wondered if, something happened with Gibson mid-game or they just wanted to get him more run. They were trying for a spark because the offense struggled. The offense got into I mean, don't get me started. And the kickers, like, can someone in the internet, this is what I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask the Fantasy Focus Nation because I'm not one of those, I'm not a Photoshop guy. I'm not a graphics guy, but I know a lot of people in our audience are.
Okay.
Can someone, the meme of the dog sitting at the table holding the coffee cup and there's flames all around him?
Yeah,
it's fine. Everything's fine, that kind of thing. Can someone just send me that, but the dog's wearing a Washington football team jersey so I can retweet that and also make that like my header or something like that,
Sure.
my phone wallpaper? Can someone just please send me that right now, just at Matthew Berry TMR?
I mean, did you see what I said yesterday about Chris Blewett?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
It
was awful.
He's attempted 5 field goals this year.
Yes.
3 of them have been blocked.
Oh, yeah.
How is that possible?
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like they're like, we're gonna cheat.
Manifesting and living up to the full potential of your name.
I know.
He's doing
like,
exactly
but
that.
Those jokes aside, the fact of the matter is that like Blutz is not a professional kicker, it doesn't seem like. Whereas Dustin Hopkins, like they were like, Washington was like
kick yesterday.
Yes, he did. Washington is like, we're going to show these players what's what. We're going to get rid of Hopkins because he missed a kick.
On Wednesday for the rest of the Kickers podcast, but we're going to keep going on with some other things for today.
Washington's a disaster. It's a hot mess.
I think I'm vindicated on my disappointment of Antonio Gibson this year. By the way, this is tied to the running backs.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that Jared Patterson came in.
Yeah.
And we can make it's a bad offensive line for Antonio Gibson. Patterson looked good. And I get it, change of pace. It definitely helps fresher legs, but still, like, Antonio Gibson looks like.
I repeat, playing with stress fractures.
Okay, well,
he's playing with a stress fracture. He's playing with a stress fracture, and he's literally got like two interns from the Minute Clinic down the road helping him out. You know, trying to like, hey, you know, like,
yeah, I get it.
Literally like
I'm sorry,
you know,
funny.
like, right. It's literally like, are you a doctor?
Funny, it's funny.
And it's like, are you a doctor? No, but I've watched 3 seasons of Grey's Anatomy.
I had a trainer,
so I think I can just gauze this up.
I had a
like,
trainer
that's what they
at one
have.
spot. I had a trainer at like one stop of my athletic career who like, you name the injury, be like, you throw a little ice on there yet? And you're like, I just tore my ACL. Like, no, I haven't, you know, like, no, like I'm bleeding from my ear. No, I have not thrown some ice on it, right? Like that's what's happening in Washington.
I believe
right
their
now.
medical staff right now is literally like 2 people from the down the road in the Minute Clinic, a staff writer on Grey's Anatomy,
right,
and the producer of Doc McStuffins.
Right, I was going to say, I believe like Dr. Phil is actually their team doctor now.
That's
right?
who I believe is actually the medical
right,
staff.
Let's move forward.
Let's move forward.
We got to keep going here. Stephania, Jamal Williams. So every week the Lions have both of their running backs on the injury report. They both come in as questionable every week, and then they play, except for yesterday when Jamal Williams didn't play.
Right, exactly. I mean, Jamal Williams was added to the injury report on Thursday with a thigh injury, but we have seen him added with a couple of different ailments, listed as limited participant in practice, and not thought much of it because they come in as questionable and they play. So this one took us by surprise, but I suppose, you know, by the letter of the law, according to the status, we should have expected it was a possibility. Just didn't hear much about it, and then he doesn't show up for the game.
I got to tell you something. I mean, obviously he's not healthy right now, so this makes things a little bit more complicated. That is my favorite trade target for the Tennessee Titans, Jamal Williams.
Ooh.
I was just going to say, that's come up. That in my Twitter mentions, that's come up a
really?
decent amount. That people have suggested that
Because he's a great person. He means a lot to the Lions culture already. They're more than a year away from having a good team and like just having enough culture. Like if you could get a 4th round pick because it's a year and a half left on this deal. It's not an expiring contract for Jamal Williams. So I think that will be. I love the kid. I mean, he obviously means a ton to Detroit. I'm not trying to say they are wrong if they don't move him. I just think that like when you're out of division, it's not a team that you're competing with. It's not Indy. Anyways, I digress.
and
Good player too.
They are
by
a
the way.
year and a half away from competing in a real way, from needing Jamal Williams. Like the deal will expire by the time they need him. So
reminds
to your
me of
point,
the old there's the old Fran Fraschilla line on the NBA Draft podcast last year where the Raptors took a guy. I think it was it like he was the center, I believe it was from Brazil.
Okay.
And they were like, "What's the analysis on this guy, Fran?" And he was like, this guy is 2 years away from being 2 years away. So the Lions probably 2 years away from being 2 years away, Daniel. But maybe this will make sense. All right, we're going to zoom forward here to Something or Nothing, brought to you by Geico. You want to know what's really scary? Seeing just how much you could have been saving by switching to Geico. Visit geico.com and see if saving money is in your future. Happy Geico-ween, which continues one day after the holiday itself.
Sure.
Let's talk about whether we learned something or nothing from yesterday's performances. And I'll start with you, Stephania, on Jerry Jeudy. Played yesterday. He did have 4 catches on 4 targets. Eye test, did he look like a guy who was pretty close to 100% to you?
You know, I only saw a little bit of Jerry Jeudy yesterday, so I want to go back and look at the full thing. But I will say this. I saw nothing that would alarm me. And the important things on the first day are, number one, do they look like they're functioning at close to or near the same level? And I thought for what he was asked to do and what I saw, yes. Number two, did they come out of the game any worse for the wear? And so far, no reports of anything like that. And if you look at the distribution, all the receivers had about the same number of catches. So he was definitely in the mix, I think, in terms of what he was being asked to do for his first game back.
Yeah, I have Jerry Jeudy only on Dynasty League or Keeper League teams, interestingly enough, this year. So my primary focus was that he came out of the game without any setbacks or injuries, and that was good news that he did not, Matthew. But let me ask you, 4 catches, 39 yards, played the 3rd most snaps amongst those big 3 wide receivers in Denver. Did we learn something or nothing yesterday?
I think we learned nothing.
Okay.
I think it was his first game back. Washington played well. I think here's what I thought we learned. We learned that Courtland Sutton's a really good player, and Courtland Sutton's not going to suddenly disappear. It was only right.
I think it was more about Tim Patrick, who's not going to disappear.
I was getting there too.
Okay.
But I was just saying in terms of alpha dog status, right? I mean, so you've got him, and Tim Patrick obviously played a decent amount of snaps too. I think there was some concern about that, but I think that's where they really want to be. In general, that their base formation is probably 3 wide with Noah Fant as well,
right.
with Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. That's those 3. But first game back, I'm not worried about it.
Same
it
here.
Was fine, and I think they'll take time for. Remember, this is only the second game that Teddy Bridgewater and Jerry Jeudy have played together, right? I mean, Bridgewater's had a lot more time with Courtland Sutton at this point.
All right, so let's go to Courtland Sutton because you mentioned him. He played 45 snaps, second most. Tim Patrick played the most at 48. He had 2 catches on 4 targets for 40 yards. His first catch was a 31-yarder down the field. It was beautiful. I think we need to establish some sort of designation for what we've been talking about. Mike Williams, Amari Cooper, Courtland Sutton. You have the guy. You're playing him every week. Is there ever a week where you're like, I've got Courtland Sutton at wide receiver 42 this week? No, the answer is not. If somebody texts you on Sunday morning is like, hey, I'm debating whether or not to play Courtland Sutton, your instinct almost every single week is going to be, yeah, you start him and you feel pretty good about him, Matthew. So he had 2 catches, 40 yards. He's had 2 games with Jerry Jeudy on the field. He has not been as productive. Do you think that is something or is that nothing? You think that's just coincidence more than anything else?
I don't think we have enough of a sample size really to judge. Like I said, this was an ugly game between 2 offenses that have struggled,
nothing,
and so I think it's more nothing.
Okay,
honestly.
I agree on that one. Let's get to Justin Fields, Matthew, who yesterday 175 passing yards. The Bears continue to throw for under 200 passing yards every game this season. It's remarkable in a league where passing is way up. They seem to buck the trend. But here was the important part.
Yeah.
He had 10 rushes for 103 yards and easily the best play of his young NFL career. It was like he was navigating a maze yesterday around 49ers defenders. Great run.
The touchdown run, it's watch the video online. It's unbelievable if you missed it. Yeah.
Something or nothing here.
It's something.
I agree.
It's definitely something. And I don't mean to beat up on Matt Nagy. I know basically the entire Chicago press and media is doing that.
Everybody
but there is a little bit, I know. But all I'm going to say is there again, I'm not trying to beat up on the guy, but is there, how like in the Charlie Brown comics, the Peanuts team is terrible, and then the one day that Charlie Brown doesn't pitch, they're awesome.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's whether it's a an aura thing or a vibe thing or a whatever, or just him and Fields aren't on the same page, but just him not being there, whatever. Justin Fields had his best game as a pro. They used him, I thought, in a better way. There was more designed runs.
Yeah, that was the big thing.
That was the big thing. They got him moving. And maybe it's also, by the way, it's another game under his belt, so he's feeling more comfortable as well. But if you're asking me something or nothing, absolutely something. Now, they're at Pittsburgh on Monday Night Football this week, so that's a tough matchup, right? Going into Pittsburgh, primetime game, and then they have a bye. But coming out of the bye, Ravens and then at Detroit, Fields, I assume, makes your waiver wire column. I think given the rushing upside is finally there. This is one of the reasons we've been talking about Fields since he was drafted.
Right.
And so if this continues, and my expectation it will be, when you're facing TJ Watt, you got nothing else to do but to run for your life.
Sure.
So my expectation here is that Fields should be high on your list.
Yeah, he's semi-high. Because there are enough quarterbacks on bye this week that Tom Brady, et cetera. But I still like Taysom Hill more. I think I feel better about him for this week. Bad matchup, and one game does not tell me for sure that the Bears are uncorking him as a runner, right? Trey Lance got 1 start for the 49ers. And right away, they were all right, 14 rushing attempts for you. He is going to be a runner if he starts again for San Francisco this year. I'd like to see it one more time from Chicago before I feel like it's something of a trend, but definitely very promising. I think he is absolutely an ad this week. Michael Pittman yesterday, Matthew, was awesome. 10 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns on 15 targets. His 3rd top 15 finish in 4 weeks. Is this something or nothing?
I think this is something.
Yeah, blossoming of a star,
but
right?
I mean, but here's the weird thing. it's sort of nothing because I expected this. Like, did I expect this monster of a game? No, but like he's somebody that I recommended on Fantasy Football Now. He made the love list this week. You know, like I had him as a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. So it's nothing in the sense that we know he's really good and we thought he was going to have a really good game. It's something in the fact that the kind of game he had was just like he was a legit wide receiver 2. He's now bordering wide receiver 1.
Yeah, let's get to 2 more, and I'll take one, and you get one, Matthew. I'll say Brandon Ayuk was something yesterday. Brandon Ayuk had 4 catches on 7 targets, 45 yards. He had a 2-point conversion as well. Season high in terms of his targets, season high in terms of his snaps. Stephania and I had a conversation about this before Fantasy Football Now started on Sunday. Like, they got to get this guy going. He's way too talented. This is something. Keep your eyes on Brandon Ayuk's growing role over the next few weeks. And how about Tyler Boyd, Matthew? 5 catches for 69 yards and a touchdown yesterday. Something or nothing?
I think it's something. 8 targets. After starting the season pretty run-heavy, Bengals have gone very pass-heavy last couple of games here. And as defenses are focusing more and more on Jamar Chase, obviously Tyler Boyd's going to benefit somewhat of that. They obviously have a connection. Burrow and Boyd were really good last year. So I do think this is something because Tyler Boyd's a good player. Like he didn't suddenly, he hadn't had fantasy production for a lot of this year, but it's not like the guy suddenly hit a wall. Like he's still a young, productive, and talented wide receiver. So in a much more pass-friendly offense, yes, I think this was something.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. We are going to, of course, address whatever happens with the latest updates surrounding Derrick Henry tomorrow. We will also have a Monday Night Football recap and any other news that could take place between now and then. For now, for Matthew and Stephania and Daniel, I am Field. We'll talk to you guys on Tuesday. Waiver wire and so much more to cover.
Watch for Kadarius Toney tonight. Game time decision, but sounds like he could play.
All right, we will do that. And also watch out for a new episode of The Fantasy Show on ESPN+. It'll be out later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. Peace out.